first up, representing the brewers, we have Larry Nelson, who is also the publisher of the global beer magazine Brewers Guardian. Hello, Larry. Larry, can you hear us? Let's check on Larry there. Larry's over in Holland at the moment.
You hear me now, Ollie?
There we go. Larry, hello. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Ollie. You can hear me from... That's great. Yeah, I'm in Holland at the moment, in Leerdam. OI has opened announced an investment today, or unveiled it for the public, £21 million investment in a new blast furnace for producing beer bottles for the Dutch, Belgian, and Luxembourg, the Benelux countries, in short.
Well, how very nice to know that we're not disturbing you while you're sitting on a sun lounger somewhere.
That wouldn't be far from the truth, actually. So.
Next up, reporting on soft drinks and the bottled water sectors, please welcome Richard Corbett. Richard's a consultant with beverage research provider Canadian. Hello, Richard.
Hi there, Ollie. I'm afraid I'm not anywhere quite so glamorous, but I'm here.
Okay, well, so as long as you're clothed, we'll be happy with that, okay?
Good.
On the spirits side, we have Ian Buxton, who we are struggling to get in touch with. He is also in Holland. This is a complete coincidence, I can assure you. Ian and Larry are mere acquaintances and not that close. We'll hopefully get something back from... we'll hopefully get in contact with Ian a little bit later on, and he can tell us what he thinks about what's going on in the spirit side. And our final expert comes in the form of Chris Losh, who's been commentating on the wine category for Just Drinks for pretty much longer than I can remember. Chris is also the editor...
Before you were born, Ollie.
Before I was born, which probably wouldn't be that far away because Chris is 89. Chris is also the editor of the UK on-trade publication Imbibe. Hello, Chris. Say hello to our webinar attendees.
Hello, webinar people. Incidentally, Ollie, I don't know what kind of sunbeds you use, but given the pictures that you've got on the screen there, they appear to turn everyone blue.
That's how we see you, and that's how we'd like it to stay. Thanks very much, Chris. Okay, so now that we're all acquainted, let us turn to the survey itself. In January, we sent out links to the surveyed questions, of which there were 18, to all of Just Drink's registered members. The questions asked our readership for their opinions on the burning issues facing our industry in the year ahead. Around 220 of them gave us their responses, ranging from drinks manufacturers to marketers, distributors, suppliers and retailers. Bear in mind also that all the sectors that Just Drinks reports on were covered by its survey responses. Just under 41% of our responders work in beer, 56.5% in spirits, 18.5% in soft drinks, etc., etc. So we've got quite a decent cover going on there. Okay, so what we're going to do for the next sort of 40 minutes or so is have a look at some of the questions and their results, and we'll bring our panel in to see what they have to say about these things. First one's a nice general question here, just asking for the overall outlook for how the landscape looks in 2013, how people think it's going to behave. It's nice to see that there's some sun on the horizon in 2013 for the majority of our responders, with 53% saying that they felt that the environment's going to improve in 2013. So it's nice to know that the glass, no matter what it's full of, is half full. Slightly alarming, however, that about a third of responders think that the outlook's going to stay the same, and those 13.7% that think it's going to get worse probably will be out of jobs for being far too negative in the coming months. At this point, we were going to ask Ian for his thoughts on spirits, but as I say, unfortunately, we're still struggling to get a hold of him. But that's the way the land looks at the moment. Okay. Next question, we looked at which markets do you think are going to be the most troublesome in 2013? I don't think there's any surprises there that it's Western Europe that is giving the vast majority of people headaches at the moment, with 58% of people saying that the region is just going to bobble along the bottom in 2013. The UK was highlighted as a particularly bad egg. Of course, I mentioned the pigs markets of Portugal, Italy, Greece and Spain may have something to say about that. Surprising to see anyone at all saying that Asia is going to struggle. I imagine that's got a little bit more to do with the slowing of growth than anything else. But I was going to turn it over to Chris actually. In the wine sector, it's all eyes east, isn't it, Chris? Where do you see the confidence taking a battering in the next 9 months? Chris, your thoughts on 2013?
For the markets?
Yes. Which markets are you least confident that trading conditions will improve during 2013?
Well, I think certainly from the wine side of it, the interesting thing about this lot is, in the sense that none of these figures are actually all that surprising. I mean, Western Europe has been poor for a while, and the US is clearly starting to recover. China, very definitely the hot ticket in town just at the moment. A couple of things I would like to go into a bit more detail on. The UK is slightly better than I would have expected. I suspect that is probably being slightly skewed by some of your spirit respondents, for whom it's probably a rather better market than the wine trade just at the moment. But also within the Western European thing, I think we've got kind of two things going on here. And the story behind the pessimism is quite interesting. There's two issues at play. One, you've got the long-term trend of generally producer countries drinking rather less wine traditionally than they have done. And then in the short to medium term, you've got the economic crisis, which has obviously exacerbated that still further in the southern Med. But also in northern Europe, I mean, there were two factors which kind of have driven wine success over the last 25 years, which has been mostly in the off-trade. And so it needed two things. It needed a big volume of cheap wine to fuel supermarkets, and it needed consumers with disposable income. Neither of those two factors is as true as it has been. Wine prices have certainly gone up, and they're not going to come down anytime in the near future. And consumers are hurting. So, add those two things together, and Western Europe looks hugely unsexy just at the moment.
It's nice to hear such positive overtones from Western Europe. Chris, you also wrote a piece for Just Drinks beginning of this month or end of last?
March, yeah.
Regarding the Chinese opportunities. I mean, we shan't read it out here, but it's quite interesting to note that people genuinely think that China is where it's at in the future. Just want to flag up very quickly some of the perils and pitfalls they ought to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I mean, we may be coming back to this a wee while, but certainly it's a pretty compelling market just at the moment. And I mean, on one hand, it's 180 million cases in 2012, so that's not to be sneezed at. I think the key factor, which again I think I'll come back to in a slide a couple of minutes time, is just what percentage of that is available to importing wine companies. And the domestic markets, domestic produced wine is massive in China, and that's going to keep growing. So it's going to make it a lot more difficult than people think. But it's one of the few areas in growth in the entire wine world at the moment. So it's the engine that's keeping things ticking over at the minute.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, my advice when it comes to wines from China is go and try some now, because then you'll be able to say in 10 years' time that you were there when it all started. So give the stuff a try. Okay. Looking at the competitive environment in 2013 amongst our subscribers and registered members of Just Drinks, it kind of goes without saying that the vast majority of people think that the environment, pretty much in all markets, will really hot up in 2013. I don't think there's any markets around the world where it can be sort of suggested that the competition would be slack. The one that I would point out to all and sundry for the coming months is Africa. There's an awful lot of noise coming out of the brewing sector. Larry, you can back me up on this very quickly. I'm sure that Africa is the next battleground. I think we'll come back to that one a bit later on with you. But it's pretty fair to say that that's where they're all focusing their attentions, really, aren't they?
I think that you can see evidence almost on a country-by-country basis. In Ghana, for example, Guinness would have launched in the last 6 months their first cassava-based beer. SAB Miller's launched their response in the last month. These are both beers that are priced to come in below roughly 70 to the 100 of a mainstream beer price. But it's intended to bring people into the formalized economy. As a bonus, it also encourages growers to develop a cash crop that would have gone to waste otherwise. But yeah, to answer your question, it's interesting that even on a product that's priced below mainstream products, there's increasing competition there. There's a willingness to invest now as economies improve across the continent, based largely on increases in improvements in raw material prices.
Absolutely, absolutely. And looking also towards the developed markets for the drinks industry, we were at the Consumer Analyst Group of Europe conference in London earlier this week, and C&C Group, the Irish-based owner of the Magners cider brand, of Tennant's beer, and I forget the US cider brand. But this is a long alcoholic drinks company that's on the rise. Is operating almost first and foremost in developed markets, and they were saying that they regularly have to explain to analysts and investors that much as these are developed markets for many companies out there, for the likes of cider, they are still developing markets. So it's pretty much across the board that there are opportunities. Okay, so to our next question, we're going to go back to Larry with this one as well. We're looking at commodity prices. This has been the hot topic for the best part of the last 3 or 4 years, when you have severe harvests that affect wine grapes, for example. That's a regular event somewhere around the world. We've had issues with harvests for wheat, I believe, in Russia in recent years, and this issue is just going to keep sort of being in the headlines going forward. So it doesn't look too...
Yeah, there's a temptation to blame global... I was going to say, Ollie, that when it comes to malting barley, it's a temptation to blame, as we do for everything else, it seems these days, global warming for what's going on. You've got drought conditions in the U.S. at the moment that are bumping up feed prices almost equivalent to what you would pay for malting barley, which should be trading at a premium in price for the growers. It's not often the case at the moment. Previously, there's been conditions, again, drought conditions in Australia, perhaps too much rain in Canada. It is, in terms of grains, something of a niche product, and it is hard to stabilize the price. Growers will hedge as best they can, or it could be that you will see, as we've just alluded to a moment ago, perhaps brewers will start to look at alternative raw materials, not just as for certain markets, but maybe across established markets as well. Hops, there's a split on raw material prices there. What are known as aroma hops, the ones that are favored by craft brewers, which will have a lower alpha percentage of alpha acids rather, are going through the roof in prices because of scarcity. These craft brewers are looking for something new, something different they can entice their consumers with, and so they're very competitively priced. You will hear certain micros talking about managing to corner a market for things like Bavaria Mandarin, which is very little that's commercially available at this point. The downside with these varieties, as a hop merchant was saying recently, Paul Corbett at Charles Ferrum, is that once they come to market, if they're unsustainable in agronomic terms, they may disappear from market quite quickly as well. The other thing to keep in mind for raw material costs would be packaging, and here we're talking about aluminum, or depending which side of the pond you're on, aluminium. This is a raw material price that also is increasing, and it's going to have an impact on canned beer, obviously. Brewers can hedge on this, and they do so, but there's pressure on this commodity in particular.
Yeah, a very interesting point you just raised there, Larry, regarding the use of more native crops for making sort of a local equivalent of beer. I don't know if you had a go on cassava yet. How do you see that taking off in Africa?
I think it's the way forward for those markets, Ollie. it's just such a win overall. It brings it formalizes the economy. It gets people from stops people, or at least perhaps gives them an affordable alternative to buying something from a pot that's been brewed on the side of the road. It's a win for the economy. It's a win for taste, and it's not that different in a lot of ways from what you would find from a mainstream beer in terms of. Okay, but to be fair, I haven't tasted much beyond sorghum, so I can't speak necessarily to the taste differences. But what brewers will be doing is marketing what they would term the all malt beers, or the largely malt products, at a premium to these entry-level products. The marketing will be to those. You will, for example, perhaps invest in a chiller unit for Castle, but you might not do the same thing for Eagle if you're in Uganda.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and again, that helps to keep the cost down for these entry-level consumers.
Yeah. No, at the same time, it's nice to know that the adage that necessity is the mother of invention rings true in our industry here, and it's very refreshing to see the brewers certainly, looking at the doorstep in their markets and seeing how they can do that rather than ferrying stuff all over the world to try and sell it. So I think I'm with you there on a win-win. Okay, super. Thanks very much for that, Larry. And we'll come back to Larry in a moment, because now we're looking at the sexy stuff. Here we go. It's M&A for people. This is where it all happens this year, last year, next year, every year. And thankfully, over half of our responders think that M&A is going to be another headline grabber in 2013. We here on Just Drinks, obviously, we live and breathe M&A, and we love it. So do keep buying, people. It gives us things to write about. What about in back to Larry in Holland? What about M&A in beer? Are we going to finally see the mega merger of ABI and SAB happen in 2013?
I think, Ollie, that will never happen. I think ABI will find other things they can do to spend their money on their cash flow. There are difficulties around the world in various markets to combine these two companies. I would think the regulators would have a field day on this. I mean, you look at what's happening now in the U.S. with the Department of Justice with the Modelo transaction. I think the future for brewing is increasingly going to be one of surprises. You're going to have to be fairly ingenious to execute a large deal of any size. The idea of hiving off a market, a single market, albeit one that's the most important one for Corona in terms of exports, is rather ingenious. I think that once the DOJ gets past its, I would guess, disbelief that they can operate independently, the merger that will be approved by them. So Modelo will be acquired, or the remainder of Modelo will be acquired by ABI, and operate globally. And the U.S. will be a standalone market with the state-of-the-art Piedras Negras brewery just about 20 south of the Rio Grande, pumping beer directly north into the U.S. The other one to look at the moment that I think is really interesting is it's a very small deal, but one that's an interesting framework. There's going to be an issue increasingly about how multinationals enter into or deal with craft brewers. Outright acquisitions tend to get the backbones up of aficionados of craft beer who feel that the big boys are usurping or taking away from the local nature, the craftsmanship of the founders of these various companies. But the deal that's been cut in Stockholm between Brooklyn Beer, Carlsberg, with private venture money from Carnegie to open a brewery there is really interesting. Brooklyn runs the brewery, Carlsberg will handle distribution, marketing, sales, and Carnegie's providing income for their investors club. That's brilliant. I think that you're going to see, hopefully, those kind of hybrid deals going forward more so.
Super, thank you. And also there's been a lot of activity in the first quarter of this year in China. When it comes to beer, we've got Carlsberg buying Chongqing, and Qingwei's gone as well. Is that going to be another battlefield there?
It's hard to say that there's a lot left to buy at this point. I think Carlsberg might have got the last of the big, well, there's Yanying and there's Tsingtao. I mean, it's possible that Yanying will be offloaded by the government, but I can't say from a distance. Number 3, number 4 in the market, depending on your estimates. ABI has decided to grow organically. They're opening about, 10 breweries in the next year or so, next 2 years. CR Snow, CR continues to add bits and pieces in various provinces. But I think the market is increasingly there's less and less you can buy that's going to be attractive. You're just buying perhaps an entry into the market. You're better off building a greenfield brewery at that point than trying to buy the asset that's old and tired there.
Super. Thank you for that, Larry. And Richard, are you still with us?
Yeah, no, I'm here, Ollie.
Hi, Richard. It's the soft drinks category is not immune to M&A, much as there are two major global players, and then there's a raft of companies quite low under them. That said, the AG Bar Britvic merger seems to be on hold at the moment. No one's really sure, even the companies included, much as they're confident that it'll happen. No one knows if it's going to happen. What do you think this says about the soft drinks industry, that AG Bar and Britvic can't get together as easily as one would expect?
Well, I don't think it's a precedent. I think that the Bar Britvic deal was probably a bit of an exception because of the sheer size of the companies involved, and I don't think, certainly in Western Europe, these scenarios come about that regularly. The deal would certainly have changed the soft drinks trading environment in the UK. Although I would add, I'm not sure why the Competition Commission got quite so excited about it, and I don't think I was alone in that. And whether it's a deterrent in future, no doubt the sort of big players will be bit more wary now of any future large-scale investments. I think because a lot of effort has been rewarded with a sort of long-winded investigation, which ultimately could put pay to finalising the deal. I think there's quite a lot of people that actually think that there's quite a realistic chance. I think Nomura said it's a 30% chance that the deal will be revisited. I think Fruit Shoot is now going to be distributed in the States, which will help Britvic dramatically, I think, certainly in terms of its international aspirations. I mean, the Competition Commission, I think, have delayed the deal by around 6 months, and in that time, I think we'll be well into the summer, and if we have what they call in the UK a sort of barbecue summer, then Britvic results will look a lot rosier, and I think the landscape would have changed a bit. But as regards to deterrent, I think that we'll certainly see that if GSK opt to sell Lucozade and Ribena. I think there'll be plenty of runners and riders to get involved in that. One of them could even be Bar, but I don't think the situation has deterred anyone really. I think that the landscape is pretty much the same, and I think if people want to expand by acquisition, it'll carry on, particularly in less developed parts of the world. And I think you always have the small sort of start-up companies like Fever Tree the other day, where people sort of want to sort of capitalise on good ideas, good concepts, and so forth.
Yeah, just to flag up, actually, Richard's written a very interesting piece that's run on Just Drinks today, where he gives us his thoughts on Coca-Cola's majority takeover of Innocent that went through about a month or so ago. These sort of transactions do sort of crop up on a regular basis, with both Coca-Cola and PepsiCo looking to expand their portfolios into far more healthy directions. Just very quickly, Richard, as a percentage, what likelihood do you see GSK offloading Lucozade and Ribena? How likely is that?
I think it would be very bold to put a figure on it. You never know what goes on behind the scenes. I think it must be on the table. It must be realistic. And if I was to put a figure on it, it must be sort of 30 or 40%. I don't think I think it's probably more likely to not happen than to happen.
Oh wow! Okay, well you heard it here first, and if you'd like his address to go and collect your £10, should they say?
Yeah, well,
do let me know. Thank you, Richard. Okay, and into emerging markets. The BRIC markets are always mentioned as being the ones for growth in the future. And this year is no exception. Of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China all top the list of markets for the future. China at about 53% is the one that everyone in every sector has got incredibly high hopes for. Russia a bit less so. I imagine that's skewed a little bit by the brewers, and we'll ask Larry about that in a moment. I'm just going to open this up to all three of you on this one. We'll come to each of you individually. Let's start with Larry then. There's still hope in Brazil. There's less optimism in Russia. India still, there's still a bit to play with there, and China there's loads to play with. Is that does that ring true for brewing?
Yeah, largely. Russia's got problems at the moment. Probably best to ask Jürgen Rasmussen at Carlsberg about that. India is still tomorrow's market. There's issues on regulation which inhibits the size of the breweries you can actually build. There are cross-border tariffs between states that prohibit or make it uneconomical to build essentially large breweries. On top of that, beer is relatively expensive in India, say, compared to China. Chinese market is still projecting at, 3 to 5% growth per annum. There's still a lot to play for there in terms of that. The issue in China is going to be finding ways to improve the margins. So premiumization is what everybody wants to talk about these days. The issue there is they've been talking about that very idea for the last decade. If China looks to stimulate internal demand as opposed to developing export markets, then there's a greater potential for that. We're talking about the world's biggest beer market, the world's biggest market for virtually anything. There's certainly scope for premiumization, but again, will it be Budweiser's gaining ground as a premium brand in China. CR Snow continues to do well with a limited number of variants. It's possible that China will continue to be, as your research suggests, the most attractive of the four. Brazil is going to be a bun fight. Shinkario has been bought by Kirin, so they've been re-energized. You've got Heineken continuing to look at targeting the premium market, and then you've got Ambev, which is just, 2/3 of the market and virtually untouchable in terms of its ability to distribute a product efficiently. Not to mention the fact that they've introduced in the last 2 years Stella Artois, Budweiser, and a re-energized Skol. So Brazil is going to be a difficult market for anybody there who's not named Ambev. Russia will continue to have its own unique difficulties. India, let's wait and see. China, that's probably the best bet for growth in terms of premium brands and improving margins.
Okay, that's great. And I'm going to ask this of all three of you, Larry, a one-word answer. Which market not mentioned there do you think is going to be the surprise package for 2013?
I think region's probably close to the mark, and you alluded to it earlier, Ollie, Sub-Saharan Africa. It's becoming a hugely competitive battlefield between Diageo, Heineken, and SAB Miller, or SAB generally. As incomes continue to improve, there's certainly no clear winners in a number of markets. Look at SAB. Look at South African breweries persisting in opening a brewery in Namibia. This was a first, suggested in 2010. It'll come to market next year. They've had a long-running difficulty in trying to find a suitable site and local issues about making that happen. But in a market of 1.2 million hectares at most, you're going to have 2 breweries there. That's going to be interesting. It should help stimulate growth there for beer. Competition in this sense in developing economies can be useful that way.
Well, we watch the area with interest when it comes to beer. Thanks for that, Larry. And then over to Richard. When it comes to the emerging markets, Richard, they're all dominated by local players, really, aren't they? And you see the larger global soft drinks companies getting involved, but more on a local level as opposed to with their international brands. Does that still ring true now?
Well, I think so. I think they've all got to tread carefully. I mean, I think. If you look at Coca-Cola and Pepsi's experience in India, I don't think it's improved dramatically, but they've had to tread very carefully. And I think that the smaller players, as we were talking about mergers and acquisitions, that's probably the way they'll go in expanding the businesses. I think Larry's right. It's all about margin, really, is getting the margins sort of to improve. Which is why they're in business, really.
Yeah, which can be echoed also by a story that we got up on Just Drinks yesterday, where we had a senior exec at Coca-Cola Co. admit that they got it wrong in India. over the last few years. There's lots of margin for error in these markets, aren't there, Richard?
I know, very much so. I mean, I think the issues of water in India is very political and pollution and so forth, and they've definitely approached it in a sort of a more cooperative sort of way. Yeah, I think, and probably to a lesser extent, China's quite an awkward place to do business at time. I suppose Danone had a bit of trouble with Wuhan. So, I mean, probably, although Brazil is, if I look at Canadians' growth figures for next year, their forecasts, you've got India at growing as much as 20%, China at 13%, Russia and 5%, with Brazil behind a bit on 4%. But if you ask me which had the sort of opportunities in terms of the shorter term, it's probably Brazil. I think it's got a sort of bit of a buzz about the place. They've got the World Cup, the Olympics coming in the next few years. It's not just the growth volumes you can look at, really.
Yeah, and of course, Rich has just flagged up there that Brazil is going to be one of the hot markets to watch for the next couple of years on account of all the sport that's going to be going on over there in the years to come. On the spirit side, I mean, I can speak for that here, and you can see how the likes of Diageo and Pernod are across the board getting very excited about all of these markets. Brazil, you had Diageo at the tail end of last year. Making very, very high forecasts for their performance in the Brazilian market. Russia, the same as India there, where you've got the burgeoning middle class. It's an old adage, but it's still very true. India's going to be an interesting one to see what happens when the United Spirits Diageo purchase does go through. Mark my words, I'm sure that's a when that goes through and not an if. I don't see any problems with that. That'll give Diageo an awful lot more muscle distribution-wise in India. But I flagged up the question on Just Drinks a couple of months or so ago. When you're looking at consumers of international spirits in India, you need to focus on the country, on the cities, on those large mega metropolises of Mumbai, Delhi, and the like, where distribution isn't really all that important. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens in India. Pernod feel quite confident with their footprint in India. They've been in there for a while. And China's a very interesting one. As of very recently, we've had an Asia analyst conference call from Pernod this afternoon, which happened at the same time as both Pernod Ricard and Rémy Cointreau's share prices took major hits this morning in their respective markets. And that will be down to some China slowdown. I think this is what we talked about earlier as well, that the growth in China has been overstated by a lot of companies, and it looks like things are starting to come home to roost a little bit when it comes to China. So again, that will give us quite a few headlines going forward. And then over to Chris with wine. We touched on this very briefly earlier, Chris. Where do you see the emerging market wine consumers multiplying?
Well, interestingly, Ollie, I've seen some figures from International Wine Spirit Record, and the growth figures for these four countries for wine are very, very, very different. 2011 compared to 2010, the growth rates were respectively for Brazil 7%, China 25%, Russia 4%, India 16% from a much, much lower base. So essentially what you're looking at there is a Russian market which is growing nicely, steadily, reasonably solid, but it's not necessarily exciting. I think a lot of people went into Russia and found it something of a chastening experience. India is tiny and may well yet do a China, but I don't know anyone who's going long on India just at the moment. I think the two key ones are Brazil and China. I think Brazil a bit harder to read, but I think for the reasons already mentioned, that there's going to be a lot of focus on Brazil. There's clearly a lot of money slopping around in Brazil. There's a lot more people who are getting interested in wine. There is a domestic wine industry, but it's not gigantic from what I understand, so there's good opportunities there. Having said all of that, the one that everyone's talking about is China, which is significantly bigger on its own than all the other three BRICS companies put together, and has been going like a train for most of the last 10 years. It's a 180 million case market pretty much for 2012, which is good going. But the one thing which I think needs to be treated with a huge amount of caution is the impact of the domestic production. For 2011, 155 million cases, of which only 27 million were imported. So straight away there you see a fairly major issue for people hoping to get rich quick in China. The other issue as well is that growth is slowing. I mean, it's not. Anyone else in Western Europe would kill to have a slower growth rate like this, but the guys at International Wine and Spirit Record reckoned 60% growth rate from 2011 to 2016. So it's still not too dusty, but it's not the kind of soar away stuff that we were seeing 3 or 4 years ago. By my rudimentary maths, I would reckon that would leave us with a market of about 240 million cases in 4 years' time, 3-4 years' time, which again is very impressive. But the big issue for that, it would put it fifth in the world. The big issue for that, however, is what percentage of those 240 million cases will be going to imported wine. If they can get their share of the market up from around 18-20% to close to 50%, then suddenly you'll have an imported wine market that's as big as the UK is currently, which is pretty impressive. At the moment, I think there's only one imported winery doing more than 1 million cases in China. That's Castel from France. So there's clearly good opportunities. Whether there's opportunities for serious brand building, which is what wineries are very fond of talking about, much tougher question. The real issue is with getting the right importers. And a lot of them talk a very good game but have zero knowledge or real interest in wine beyond the fact that it can help them make a few bob. The second issue, which is unknowable really, is if imported wines start to do extremely well and take significant market share from Chinese-owned companies, whether the government might take a rather dim view of that and act to do something against it. And the third issue, which no one really talks about, but I think could be a massive one for anyone looking at doing serious medium to long-term business in China, is demographics. By 2030, 360 million Chinese will be over the age of 60. It's going to be a very top-heavy country, which is going to have all sorts of implications for the way in which the economy works and for the amount of disposable income available to the kind of people who traditionally drink wine, kind of young, aspirational, 20 to 40-year-olds. And I think that's something that could be a real factor. So a lot of interest in China, and understandable, but an awful lot of caveats as well, I think.
Would you recommend that the larger wine companies get into domestic production, much as some of them are doing? Is this wise?
Well, they've tended to kind of team up with the Chinese, who basically have done what the kind of Japanese did with kind of European car manufacturers, which is to kind of come in, taken all their expertise, and then said, right, goodbye, thank you very much. An awful lot of the kind of imported wine goes into Chinese wine as well. It's used to kind of beef up the domestically produced stuff. So I don't think that the quality of the locally produced Chinese wine is anywhere near at a standard that kind of Western countries would find tolerable, but it does have the major advantage of being affordable. They sell mostly under 50 yuan, which is a price that even the cheapest European wines really struggle to get anywhere near. So I think there's a lot of people have kind of tried to make kind of progress with joint ventures and so on. I think again, treat them with a certain amount of caution. I think they're tough and they're very difficult to set up. And I think more people now are interested in trying to build their own kind of brands and set up their own distribution networks. And I think there's probably enough traction in the market to make that work, but it's a slow burn. It can get you to 30,000-40,000 cases relatively quickly. Whether it can push you on from there up to really serious numbers is a very different story, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. And for more of Chris's thoughts on the wine industry in China, I refer you to justdrinks.com and have a look at Chris Losh's comment pieces over the last couple of months. Okay, we're coming up to our penultimate question here, and we're looking at the retail channels that are going to give opportunities for growth in 2013. Here we go. So, what have we got here? We've got the supermarket chains taking a third of answers. I'm actually surprised it's that low. Convenience has got a presence there. On-trade, of course, the UK on-trade will be in high spirits over this weekend when the duty on beer comes down by a whole English penny at midnight on Sunday. And so it's all looking rosy when it comes to retail channels. Chris, is that the case for wine, however?
Well, actually, the interesting thing about this set of figures, Ollie, I think, is that if you'd asked the same question 10 or 15 years ago from the wine side, I think you'd have got a very different set of responses. I think at that time, everybody was looking at approaching the kind of mature or semi-mature markets, and they're looking to try and get into it through the supermarket chains. And given that such a high percentage of wine is still sold through the supermarkets, UK it's like 75-80%, I would just have expected to see that supermarket figure, as you mentioned, to be significantly higher. Even added in with the convenience stores one, which are increasingly being taken over by the supermarkets as well, it's still barely over 50%. And I think what that shows you is I think it's a reflection on just how tough that area of the business has become. People are still trading there. Would it offer you the greatest opportunities for growth? Very, very different story. I think the problem has been, well, I think there are three problems. I think one, a consolidation of retailers. There's been an awful lot of that all over the kind of westernized world over the last 10 years, which means there are fewer people with whom to open an account to sell the product. I think those retailers have also had a tendency, certainly over the last 5 years, to be trimming back on their wine ranges rather than increasing them. So even if you've got a listing, it's harder to hold on to it. And thirdly, general retail figures are flat to falling. And in situations like that, it becomes a scrap for market share, and wine specifically gets used quite heavily as a tool to do that, which means that there are an awful lot of pretty nasty kind of expensive promotional techniques being used, which make it harder and harder to make decent money. That, I think, probably explains the general disillusion with the supermarket from most of your respondents. I think it's interesting that people, the on-trade percentage, 20%, I suspect that's probably somewhat higher than it would have been 10 years ago when nobody was really talking about the on-trade. It was all supermarket volume. I suspect that that's largely more of a reflection on how hard it is to get listings. A lot of people seem to me to be defaulting into a strategy of concentrating on the on-trade simply because they can't get those supermarket listings. And most people seem to try it for a few years, realise it's very, very time-consuming and expensive and manpower heavy, and then kind of give up on it and then go and look somewhere else. So I think that's an issue. I think that one of the most interesting figures, actually, in that graph is the percentage of traditional retailers, which in the wine industry, I would say is kind of traditional wine merchants. 10 years ago, we were reading them their last rites, and the supermarkets, we thought, had pretty much put the last nail in their coffin. And now there's been a resurgence. I think as the supermarkets have kind of concentrated on the volume end and trimmed back their ranges, it's left an opportunity for the real specialists to come in. And I think that's one of the few good news stories that there's been in some markets over the last few years. And obviously I think that may be not unrelated to the growth in online stuff. It's much easier to sell wine if you've got a kind of an infinite market to call on than if you're just kind of relying on people walking past your shop. And I think that 15% of online sales is quite significant, and I would imagine set to increase as well for fairly obvious reasons.
Yeah. With the benefit of hindsight, I think this question could have been split, though, really, between the developed wine markets and the emerging wine markets. Because I don't mean to put you on the spot here, Chris, but would you see that chart being the same if it were a question specifically about the retail channels in emerging markets, or are we going to see something completely new happen there?
Well, it would be, certainly having just done that stuff on China, it would be enormously different in China because the power of the supermarkets, the supermarket power is growing, but its influence in terms of, for instance, wine retailing is still fairly negligible. So, it's a lot more about the on-trade and small, I suppose you'd call them convenience stores, really, and then, a tiny number of specialists. And I don't quite know how the internet sales work in China, but complicatedly, I would imagine. But it would be an extremely different graph, completely different. I think that those figures probably reflect a sort of Western European, possibly American model. But it's, for a mature market, I think what it shows is a certain ennui with the kind of mass market retailing in mature markets, for sure.
Yeah, well, I look forward to next month's comment piece from you on online wine sales in China. Okay, super. Thanks a lot for that, Chris. And here we go, folks. We are on to our last question of the afternoon. We're looking at the trends to drive your innovation initiatives in 2013. Again, do bear in mind that this is, across the board in drinks. We're looking at beer, wine, spirits, soft drinks, and bottled water. We're going to ask Richard about this in a moment, but I think that with quality being rated so high as one of the key trends, I can't help feeling that must be the marketers in all of these drinks companies making their voices heard, because that's quite a subjective point. Flavour, of course. Occasion drinking. The one that I was surprised was as low as it was, however, is health. And I'm pretty sure Vicky's got some thoughts on that, because when it comes to soft drinks, Richard, surely it's all of innovation. Innovation is completely about health, isn't it?
Well, I think certainly with the ongoing obesity debate that never seems to die down, I think that's certainly, whether you classify low-calorie products as healthy or whether you look at functional products as healthy, I would probably be perhaps a little surprised. But there was quite a high percentage of beer respondents in the original survey, and I suspect that may have pushed down the healthy sort of side of the results of the survey.
Those pesky beer drinkers, yeah. And then, okay. Well, what about looking at sustainability? There's a lot of talk about PET and how bad it is for the environment, and how plant bottles and the like are coming into play. Is that going to sort of pick up?
Well, I was quite surprised how low it was. I certainly, when I do my research rounds of sort of various markets, it's certainly with the packaging companies, it's a major sort of focus. That global warming is pretty prominent in the news everywhere you go, really. So I was actually quite surprised that sustainability was only accounted for 29%. And I thought what was also quite sort of interesting was that 60% admitted that they will be spending the same amount on sustainability initiatives, which I would generally expect people, even if they are spending the same, to actually say they're spending more from a PR perspective, even if it's a sort of anonymous survey. But I think we may be seeing, and I think there has been certainly some evidence of it in the UK news, that we may be seeing a little bit of environmental fatigue creeping in. I think if we had looked at it sort of, if you'd had the survey a couple of years ago, it would have been higher, and I think certainly on the forefront of many big companies, the bigger players' itineraries.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe it wasn't just the marketers that think it's quality, and it's far broader than that.
Well, I think
Go on.
So I think the quality sort of, so probably certainly in the developed world, I think people are looking that there's going to be less innovation just because of the nature of the economics certainly in the developed markets, and I think people focusing on quality and flavour, they're sort of consolidating their existing brands rather than bringing out any radical new concepts or products.
Yeah. And very quickly, Chris, when it comes to innovation in wine, that's lower alcohol and that's it, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah, sadly. I think one of the issues about wine is it's being innovated. They're being forced to innovate by pressure, political pressure, demanding essentially supermarkets, for instance, sell less booze. So there's pressure on, I'd imagine, all the products to make lower alcohol versions. And in wine, they could do that by simply selling stuff at 10% alcohol rather than 13.5% if they wanted. But actually, there's also a tax break to go under 5.5%. The wines under 5.5% alcohol pay less tax because they're not officially deemed wine. So there's been an awful lot of these kind of Franken's wine monsters appearing over the last few years. And the reason that they pay less tax because they're not wine is because they don't taste like wine either. They're mostly pretty lamentable. If anyone kind of gets into the category drinking them, I'd be astonished. I mean, people might start drinking them, but if they were then to move up to a bottle of something like proper wine, I think they'd find it so different that it would be a complete shock to their system, and they'd probably migrate back again to the Bacardi Breezers, to be honest.
Well, we live in hope. Thanks very much for that, Chris. Okay, folks. Well,
Ollie.
Hi, Larry. Go on.
Thanks. So I had something there on the innovation question. I think there's perhaps a category that hasn't been discussed, and that's maybe unique to the brewing industry, and that's gender. Brewers are continuing to be mystified how to market to women, and there's been a raft of products in the last couple of years which have been, such as Anime and Molson Coors launched in the UK, which are meant to be lighter, sweeter drinks that are meant to appeal to women. There's been very little evidence to suggest that these kind of products work, in my opinion. The other way to approach the market the brewers are doing is to segment into cider, and Corona with Carlsberg and Heineken, and recently Stella Artois from InBev, examples of this trend. But that's more of a long-term play. I think there's an issue here where brewers need to look at, to rethink their approach to female drinkers. If a woman, if it will at a bar, at a dinner party, will opt for a glass of red or white wine, she, like anybody else, is interested in taste and flavor. And I suspect that the answer lies in two areas. One is to rethink stronger, more flavorful beers for female as well as male consumers. And secondly, presentation, which is an ongoing issue. Better point of service, maybe table service, so you don't have to go up to the bar, different glasses being served, smaller serving sizes. There's a lot that can be done by the industry to attract women to beer. I just don't think it's being done very well at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would also add that I often despair of the level of schadenfreude that hits our industry when one of these female-targeted beers dies a death. What I would say to that is that at least they're jolly well trying, and I see it more as part of the process as it being an overnight success, and they're getting closer, I'd say.
No, you're right. I mean, there are points to be scored there in terms of their willingness to experiment and see the right way forward. I don't think they're there yet, though. Yeah,
no, I agree with you there. Super. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, we're going to give it another sort of 5 minutes or so at the end of this for a bit of Q&A. If you have any questions, do use your chat panel to get them to our panel now, and we shall all have a go at giving you our thoughts. There's some questions that come in already. Wanted to ask for Chris, actually. Here's one. When we're looking at wine in China, my new favourite subject, Chris, is it mainly high-end wine growth? Is it all just at the premium and super premium end for wine in China?
No, actually, interestingly, no, it's not. I think that the wine industry generally pays a disproportionate amount of attention to, what's going on with first growth claret and this kind of stuff. And actually, the vast majority of the Chinese market Even the French market there is very, very cheap. I've seen figures which show that even the French imports there, so 60% of them are selling for, equivalent to around sort of $10. So it's right down at the kind of mass market end. One of the cynicisms I've had about China in the past is that it's all trying to sell, overpriced top-end wine to plutocrats. In fact, there's a real attempt being made to cash in on the kind of mass market, and I think that definitely that's where everyone's going with it. That's where a lot of the bulk wine that's ended up in China is going into exactly that kind of stuff. So I mean, it is still a very, very good market to sell your sort of like top Burgundies, top Bordeaux, expensive fizz, this kind of stuff, and even kind of top Italian Tuscan wines and so on. They're starting to find nice markets there as well. But actually, hearteningly, that's only a small part of the picture. The vast majority is significantly more affordable than that.
Yeah, I agree because I think it's more a case that the headlines are being grabbed by the high-end purchasers, isn't it? It's more a case of the most expensive gets the most headlines type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's never hard to find a headline about some factory owner in Beijing who's spent stupid amounts of money on an 80-year-old bottle of champagne or a 300-year-old bottle of cognac or something. Those are the kind of stories which come out, but actually there's a lot more kind of proper groundwork being done at what I'd call a more realistic level, and I think quite rightly that's where everyone sees the market.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Chris. Richard, just turning to you, we have a question, sir. We're looking at health concerns and the threat of regulatory clampdowns on energy drinks over in the States. How is legislation going to impact on soft drinks in 2013, do you think? We've got a stay of execution in New York for the large size full sugar drinks. Is this something sort of to worry about, or is this legislative envelope going to slide?
I think it's there's a lot of noise, and it always gets a lot of publicity. Certainly, the French tax on soft drinks. There's speculation in the UK. It's always on the agenda. I mean, across the world, obviously in New York and America, the obesity debate goes on and on and on. And energy drinks are the new focal point, with Monster particularly in America. But generally, in terms of sales, I think the audience of a lot of these products, Monster and even Red Bull to an extent, that they're quite young and they're pretty immune to all the negative publicity and the speculation on health effects and everything. And sales seem to, I think Canadine are expecting global growth of 14% or 15% for energy drinks. So I think that it makes a lot of noise. I think actual implementing the legislation and so forth is actually a lot harder than people think. And actually, certainly in France, they've relaxed the rules. Norway, Denmark, in the last 3 or 4 years. So you're actually probably seeing the laws actually relaxing a bit more. I think there were some age restrictions put in, certainly in Sweden. I'm not sure I think it was almost voluntary by the retailers themselves, just to be seen to be doing the right thing. But certainly, I don't think that it's certainly not affecting the long-term growth prospects. I think of the energy drink market.
Yeah, that's the point that chimes true. I think for all sectors of the drinks industry, isn't it? There's a lot of legislative bodies trying to be seen to do the right thing, and then when it gets to the full detail and thrashing that out in court, it usually comes a cropper. So much as there are battles to be fought, they're quite possibly not quite as fought as they initially look. Okay, thank you for that, Richard. And then one for Larry. We've also got one or two on spirits, which I'll take after this one. But Larry, we've got a bit of a battle on our hands, haven't we, between craft brewers and global brewers in the US. Specifically over what counts as craft beer. We've got the likes of of Miller Coors getting into craft beer. We've got ABI trying their own versions of craft beer equivalents with Budweiser, of all things, which are very good actually, but that's by the by. Do you think that global brewers can actually, truly be successful in this segment in the US, or are craft beer drinkers a bit more savvy like that and slightly wary of where beer comes from?
Yeah, that's the big question of the year for the brewing industry. I've written a column a couple of months back now, Ollie, on Just Drinks. Perhaps you could refer people to that, which does address the question in some detail. Where I've asked whether or not it indeed is possible for a multinational brewer to be considered in some fashion a craft brewer. They're going to, it's the growth market. They can't help themselves. They're going to have to participate in some fashion. So it could be the ABI approach, where you buy Goose Island, or Molson Coors, which has started to acquire breweries not only in Canada with Granville Island and Creemore Springs, but also in the UK with Franciscan Well most recently, and previously Sharps. If you had a company that was run almost like a loosely structured conglomerate, where these companies left their own devices, their own CEOs, their own marketing strategies, and the central company is providing simply marketing support, capex for equipment purchases, and distribution, conceivably a craft brewer could be a multinational, is the thought. That's going to be highly contentious. This is, big guys masquerading as small guys would be the argument. It's no longer authentic. It's certainly the position that the Brewers Association, the trade body for craft brewers in the States, has taken. But it's an ongoing issue. Can a multinational be a craft brewer? I think the idea needs to be considered. And again, going back to the business about what's happening in Sweden, where Brooklyn has partnered with Carlsberg, it can also be not a negative, but it could also be conceivably a positive when these two big and small combine forces.
I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness here, guys. Just watching the regular Just Drinks commentators come up with ideas for their next column pieces. Your comment on can a craft brewer be a multinational brewer will probably keep me awake tonight, Larry. Thank you very much for that. We've got a bit of a spirits question here, asking about tequila. Asking what the tequila category needs to do to become a stronger category worldwide. Those of you that operate in spirits will know that tequila outside of Mexico is in the US and pretty much nowhere else. The company to watch, as I'm sure everyone knows as well, is Patron, which is having great success in Europe and especially in duty free. My take on what tequila needs to do is it kind of needs to choose one of the two directions it wants to go in. If it wants to focus on the high-end aged tequila, then duty free is the way for you. When it comes to the white, the Blanco tequila, my suggestion, and it's slightly out there, forgive me, is go and have a look at China. The reason I say that is the Chinese spirits market is 99% dominated by domestically produced spirits. That's only 1% of all spirits in China are international spirits brands, and they're nearly all brown. If you make cognac and if you make whiskey and you're not in China, then you need to go there tomorrow. My point is there that tequila, Blanco, could actually go and have a little bit more success in a market like China that would like to try something international but is reluctant to move too far away from its domestic market. And that domestic market is all white spirits. There's a definite gap in that market, and go and take a look there. That's my advice to you tequila folk. And then we've got one more asking if we could talk a little bit about where the ultra-premium spirits are heading to and the perspectives for this segment in 2013. I know, Chris, you also look at spirits as well, so you have a little think about that question while I give my opinion on ultra-premium spirits. Quite frankly, the sky appears to be the limit. There are certain Scotch whisky producers, for example, that release a limited edition high-end expression on an almost weekly basis. These may be in different markets or the same market, almost week in, week out, and that's the way they work. And they're still going, and they're still going strong. So, a bit of a cliche, but it does strike me that the sky is the limit, much as we we commentators find it slightly exhausting having to report on the most expensive or the most limited edition. There are people out there buying a lot of stuff that's coming onto the market. Chris, would you agree with that?
Oh, completely. Yeah, I think it's that paradox at a time when there are areas of the world that are kind of imploding financially. Even within those countries, there are probably more super wealthy people than there have ever been, and it's been a big growth area globally. So I mean, I definitely see the spirits guys tapping into that. But you can't criticise them for doing it. I mean, from a business sense, it makes sense. But as you say, it's rather wearying to have yet another one that's been, strained through Greta Garbo, strong and aged for 78 years in some rare Slovenia bout. I mean, it's nonsense, isn't it, really? I mean, in terms of flavour, it's all bollocks. The only good thing is that they only produce about 6 bottles of it, and they all get sold in Russia, so we don't need to worry ourselves too much about it.
Yeah. And for any under 18s that are listening, I apologise for Chris's potty mouth, but you probably shouldn't be listening to this, and you should be doing your homework anyway. That's great. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and we're going to call it a day now. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. Just to let you know, as it says on the screen, that the audio-visual version of this presentation will be available probably at the beginning of next week at just-drinks.com/webinars. And by Wednesday of next week, we're going to email you a link to that session. So if you give us a week, that will have the full webinar and the Q&A. If you have any questions about any drinks sector over 2013, do feel free to email me directly. My email address is news@just-drinks.com. That's news@just-drinks.com. As I said, we'll send out the link for the full version of the webinar by Wednesday week, and you're also going to get an infographic, which is nice. We're going to have some more webinars going on throughout 2013, and we shall keep you posted about those. Again, thank you very much for joining us, folks. Thanks to our panelists, to Larry Nelson, to Richard Corbett, and to Chris Losh, and to Ian Buxton, who's probably banging his head against a keyboard somewhere in Holland. Have a good rest of the day wherever you are, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks very much. Goodbye.